Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Convergent model for educational technology management presentation. I'm going to introduce, and I'm glad I had the pleasure to introduce the presenters. Leif Nelson, to my far left.
Hello.
Here. Leif Nelson is the interim director of the Learning Technology Solutions. Prior to his current role, he was the coordinator of instructional and assessment platforms in academic technologies. Before coming to Boise, he was the manager of learning technologies at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay, where he also taught information science. He has been providing expertise and leadership in learning technology support and management for over a decade. He has a bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree in educational technology. He is currently completing his doctorate in educational technology from Boise State University. His areas of expertise and research are effective pedagogy, online education, critical theory, and instructional theory. He also enjoys drumming, and he's very good, by the way. Basketball, food, and his family. So welcome.
Thank you, Anna.
And Daniel Gold. He joined the Boise State University team in 2013 as a project manager within the Office of Information Technology, project management office. Since joining the team, his work has largely focused on increasing the throughput and success of learning technology initiatives. Just bear with me. He wrote this. Through fostering academic partnerships and providing a strategic framework for the continued growth and evolution of learning management solutions on campus. He is amazing. He makes things happen. That's what it boils down to, okay? Daniel joined the Learning Technology Solutions team in September of 2014. Prior to Boise State, Daniel spent a decade in the private sector working on knowledge management and service strategies. He has a bachelor's degree in urban planning and is PMI certified project management professional. Outside the office, he likes to spend time with his wife, his two sons, camping, and enjoying, that's it. Okay, camping, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, welcome. Here they are.
Thanks, Anna, for the introduction. Appreciate that.
Does this work too?
So I made the mistake of staring at the projector bulb, so if I'm like facing this way or something, just kind of, like say something so I can get some kind of sense of where you are. So our topic is a convergent model for educational technology management. The presentation, I think, is a little bit more fun than the title makes it sound. There will be some interactivity. I know it's after lunch, so we're going to probably get you, moving and talking a little bit, so just kind of be forewarned about that.
Yeah, we're really excited about this one. I think it's an interesting one. A big part of what we're going to talk about, can you guys hear me okay? I'm holding this football initially. A big part of what we're going to talk about is about how kind of our perceptions color the way that we interact with others in our daily lives. We really sit at an interesting place between IT, project management, or IT management in general, and academics. And those are very different worlds. And one of the things that I learned coming into the university from the private sector was just how very different those are. A lot of the things that were deeply ingrained in me seemed so very foreign, and you could immediately see force fields go up when I would start talking about things. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And as we went through, everybody has seen this, right? At one point now, we've seen this dress. Is it blue and black, or is it white and gold, right? And this was such a great kind of example of kind of what we wanted to talk about today. We couldn't help when we saw this come out and broke the internet. We thought we'd throw it in the presentation. Everybody wears some colored glasses, right? That bias is inherently in us. It's part of who we are. It comes from our training, our education, our life experiences. And understanding and recognizing that bias is really a critical part of being successful in bridging this gap. Ready? Mm-hmm. Moving on. Okay, so we thought we could stand up here and do the I'm a Mac, I'm a PC thing. I'm a project manager, he's an instructional technologist. But we thought we'd let George Carlin talk to us about football and baseball. That might be a more entertaining way to do it. Oh, maybe. Help. If only there was somebody in IT in the room. Any help for me? Right.
So while we're waiting for that, just kind of quick show of hands. Does anybody come from more of like a IT management or project management kind of background?
One in here.
Okay. Who comes from more like a academic affairs kind of side of the house?
Who has a horrible time dropping themselves in one of these two categories?
Right. Who feels like they're wedged in between, like there are these kind of distinct cultures and you're sort of sandwiched in the middle, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about here.
One more. There you go. We were totally good right before.
If that doesn't work, though, I'm sure you've all seen this classic monologue by George Carlin where he talks about football versus baseball, right? Have you seen this? So he says football is, divided into yards, and it's this rectangular field, and you are trying to take over the enemy territory, and you wear helmets, etc. In baseball, it's this. Every park is different, and it's a diamond, and you wear caps, and your objective is to go home, and it's like this distinction between football, which is very kind of rigid and structured, and there are discrete rules, and baseball is just kind of you go play on a field and have some fun, etc. So we thought that was a good example to describe maybe the differences between people who come from more of a business-oriented background, where you have discrete goals and objectives, and you need to increase revenue and reduce cost, as opposed to academic culture where let's just kind of sit around and have coffee and think about it and have a discussion and anything goes, and it's a little more unstructured and casual.
The journey is way more important than the destination in academics, And that's been, I think that's definitely something that I saw as I came into it, and just kind of realizing that. I think the way I tried to, my CIO, for my first day on the job, came to me and said, in academics, the only place where 1 versus 99 is a tie. And I thought, man, that's really strange. That couldn't be true, and it's totally true. You have that one outlier, and you will stop everything and kind of work on those situations and try and reach that consensus. I noticed there's a lot of, coming from a business world, there's a lot of MBAs in the business world, right? And MBAs are negotiators. They're here to solve a problem, to come to an agreement, make a decision, and move forward. Get out of that room and move on to the next decision. In the academic world, there's a lot of PhDs, a lot of doctors. Doctors are debaters. And that's really what, the conversation is more about, let's talk about this, let's go through all the details, let's make sure that I fully understand it, let's have a debate. And so when you come, a project manager, and you step into this world, the first thing you notice is, I'm not having a discussion about whether or not I'm ready to move on with development of this activity. I'm having a thesis defense right now, and it can be a little uncomfortable when you first start out. Let me go ahead and we'll just go ahead and move through this, and hopefully at some point maybe we'll be able to play that for you at the end of this one.
Okay, so before we jump into this, I just want to, let's start at this table right over here. We're going to count off by 1s and 2s, okay? So if you want to say you're a 1, then skip over here.
1.
And let's jump on back to this table.
2. There you go.
Okay. All right, so 1s, what we want you to do is if you have some kind of a device, a laptop, a phone, a tablet, whatever, do a Google image search for the word business and see what comes up. If you're a 2, do a Google image search for the word academics.
All right.
So we'll give you a few minutes here.
Yeah. Yell out something you see as you go through there. Just let us know what kind of things you're seeing. What kind of patterns show up in the images for business, or patterns show up in the images for academics? Yeah, I can give it a shot again.
All right, so you're doing your search. We're going to see
And try that.
Oh,
we're going to listen to Carlin for a minute and then come back to
That's
this.
good. All right, while you're doing that, let's let George tell us all about it.
And try that.
Let's put it this way. There are things about the words surrounding football and baseball which give it all away. Football is technological. Baseball is pastoral. Football is played in a stadium. Baseball is played in a park. In football, you wear a helmet. In baseball, you wear a cap. Football is played on an enclosed, rectangular grid, and every one of them is the same size. Baseball is played on an ever-widening angle that reaches to infinity, and every park is different. Football is rigidly timed. Baseball has no time limit. We don't know when it's going to end. We might even have extra innings. In football, you get a penalty. Baseball, you make an error. Whoops. The object in football is to march downfield and penetrate enemy territory and get into the end zone. In baseball, the object is to go home. I'm going home. And in football, we have the clip, the hit, the block, the tackle, the blitz, the bomb, the offense, and the defense. In baseball, they have the sacrifice.
So that's the difference between working in kind of like a IT world and working in the academic world.
It's cultural differences, really.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So all right. So what did you see? What did you see when you look for business?
Okay, so so if you're a 1, what'd you find?
Yeah.
Just general themes.
Yeah.
People sitting around talking together.
Sitting around talking.
Yeah, handshaking.
Lots of handshaking.
Yeah, lots of handshaking. A lot of suits and smiles. Yeah. Did you
Pointing
see
at things, looking
any-
important.
any graphs? You got graphs
Light
and
bulbs?
presentations? Are all of the charts going up to the right?
Yes.
You notice that, right?
Maybe
We're
some
always
dollar
moving in
signs?
that direction. Yeah. Big buildings, right?
Oh, yeah,
Bright lights. It's very well lit, always in the business world. Very well lit. Lots of blue. Yes. Yeah. All right, what did you see when you looked for academics? What kind of things did you notice?
Lots of books.
Yeah. Lots of books. People probably sitting around in a classroom. Maybe you got a sage on a stage somewhere in there, right? But yeah, it's definitely more of a, it's a little bit more comfortable. It's
Right.
the lighting is a little bit softer.
Yeah.
The books are a little bit more welcoming. There's people researching and studying. It's that emphasis on debate.
So if we were Carlin, it would say, in business, we wear dark suits and we have meetings and we make things happen. In academics, let's go read about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that what we're trying to reinforce here is that there are stereotypes that are just ingrained in us. And when we think about or we hear terms or vocabulary that comes from maybe the other side of the fence, you immediately have a sort of reaction to it.
Okay, so now 1s and 2s. I don't know if this will work. If you're sitting at a table by yourself, you might want to find somebody at a different table. We want an even number of people here. But if you're a 1, then I want you to hold up your hand next to a 2. And if you're a 2, hold up the hand that's facing the 1.
Give us one of these.
All right, so go like this, right?
One of these.
So like you're high-fiving each other and like you're frozen
find a
in
buddy.
time, right?
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, everybody ready? So now, 1s, what I want you to do is start pushing your hand towards the 2. 2s, why are you pushing back?
Yeah, we didn't tell you to do that.
Huh?
What's up with that?
All right, you can put your hands down.
Yeah. So, but there's sort of a natural physiological reaction when somebody pushes on you. You push back,
Right.
That's just what you do.
So if you really kind of step back a little bit, what happens is anytime there's a force acting on you, the natural tendency, like this is basic physics, right? The natural tendency is to resist, to push back, to reject. So think about how that might happen in institutional organizational culture, right? If there are new models or new concepts or even new vocabulary that's being imposed on you, your first reaction is to say, this is foreign and I'm going to be afraid of it and I'm going to reject it and distrust it and be, and resist, push back.
And you'll see it in your meetings. The body language changes. You use a term, you use a phrase, or you're talking about a process that's not familiar to somebody, and all of a sudden their arms are crossed, they're taking a step back, and the body language changes. You can see immediately that they're uncomfortable with either what you're saying or the way you're approaching a situation. It happened to me quite a bit in my first year in the university. So what's the alternative here? How do we kind of overcome this? How do we kind of move past it? And what this guy has a wonderful t-shirt, I thought I'd just throw that in here, systems theory. And the idea behind this is that there's sort of a unified approach, that if you take a step back and think about the ecosystem that these realms, instructional design, academics, and project management, and of the business world work in, there are consistent patterns and behaviors. And that understanding those patterns and behaviors that are consistent among those different worlds will actually help you learn or develop sort of a better understanding of how to unify these two models.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about project management and instructional design specifically. And it doesn't have to be project management and instructional design. It could be something like IT management compared to faculty development or technical support compared to teaching. But we're talking about the two different cultures that are common in higher educational institutions, right? But there's something specifically unique about project management and instructional design that we want to talk about. And that's that they both, were both formed as disciplines around the same time, right? So this is like 1930s, 1940s, when a guy named Henry Gantt was commissioned to help build the Hoover Dam. Okay, so this hugely complex project that involved lots of different people. You needed the manufacturers to provide the materials. You needed to coordinate, like, how we're going to build this huge dam to, hold back the Colorado River. It was enormous. It was this, impossible feat at the time, right? But Gantt, if you're familiar with the Gantt chart, helped to come up with a way to schedule the process and to identify the dependencies for all these different moving parts, right? This hugely costly, massively complex endeavor. So similarly, if you're familiar with Robert Gagne, he's one of the kind of godfathers of instructional design. World War II, we had a need to train troops as quickly and rapidly as possible. And so Gagne came up with a couple ways to, filter the people that were most kind of, apt to learn effectively the skills that they needed them to learn to go out and fight in World War II. And then they also designed video content that would help them learn as quickly as possible. So this was really considered like the birth of instructional design as a discipline. So, kind of different needs at the time, but if you look at what was happening like just kind of nationally or internationally, really this is right after the Industrial Revolution. This is when a lot of fields were trying to kind of systematize and apply processes and methods to how they did their work. And if you think about project management and instructional design, these are ancient human activities. Project management is doing things, literally, right, at its most kind of basic fundamental, element. And instructional design is learning things, right? So, but in the mid-20th century, we gave names to these things, and I did a Google Ngram search for when these terms, project management and instructional design, started to become more popular. It's really, like I said, 1940s, 1950s, and then they've kind of grown ever since on these different parallel tracks. But what we would argue, and what we're going to get into a little bit more here, is that there are similarities between these two different disciplines because they've almost had a convergent evolution where they've developed this similar traits and models over time. And we're going to get into that a little bit and talk about how that might be a platform to reach agreements at your institutions. So stick with us, and we think we're onto something here.
So what's interesting about that is you saw on that chart that kind of project management had really overtaken instructional design from kind of a reference in what you see in the material. And you see that a lot in some of the recent literature, things that have been written about how to incorporate project management practices into instructional design. And I think Leif and I see this as kind of almost there, right? It's kind of like you're getting it, you understand there's some similarities, there's some overlap here, there's benefits of combining these two things, but it's more than just enforcing project management methodologies on instructional designers.
Yeah, so all the articles and books that I've seen so far are project management imposed on instructional design. It's like a one pushing on a two. And so I think that a better approach is to look for common frameworks, common language, and then use that as a way to bridge these two worlds.
Absolutely, and then recognizing the similarities is what's going to give it power. And you can see the article this came from is Project Management and Instructional Design. ADDIE is not enough. You're not doing what you should be doing fully. You should be doing more. We should do some project management. So what does it look like? What kind of similarities are we talking about? Well, the first thing we might talk about is there's two different kinds of project management. And this one that we have on the screen right now is about continuous improvement, right? Sort of, you might be familiar or heard about Six Sigma or total quality management, this sort of evolving sort of process where you're continually trying to find improvements to something. You're always doing something and evaluating the success and then moving on to the next improvement. That exists in both areas. That exists in instructional design and in project management. These are kind of came up with them on their own unique little ways, but we're talking about the same things. In project management, we call it the plan, do, check, act cycle. So this is a kind of similar model. And in instructional design, you have the experiential learning process, right? Experimental learning process where you experiment, you experience, you observe, conceptualize, and you continue to work in this cycle. We both have similar ideas about how we handle continuous improvement, right? There's an idea where you're planning, you're doing, you're checking, and you're evolving. Similarly, we both have ways of getting things done, just getting things done, something with a start and an end. In project management, one of the most common frameworks that you'll see is what the Project Management Institute goes with their IPEC model, right? Initiate, plan, execute, control, and close. Those kind of terms that they like to use. instructional design, you have the ADDIE model: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate.
Almost the same steps, just different words for them, right?
Yep. And if I ask you what you're doing in some of these phases, you would tell me the same thing. You would say, oh, well, what I'm doing here and I'm planning here is I'm thinking about what it needs to be done. I'm identifying the tasks or the goals. I'm coming up with my learning outcomes and putting that together. I'm thinking about what could go wrong during the process. I'm thinking about how long it's going to take. It's the same thing you're doing when you're designing that experience within the ADDIE model. We're talking the same thing. We're saying the same things. We're just using different language to do it.
So even in the documents that we use, if let's say that you're about to embark on a project or maybe a research initiative, if you're coming from an academics approach, you're going to come up with a document that says this is justifying why this is important, and these are the components that are going to be within that document to help get buy-in from my stakeholders or leadership, right? And if it's a project, I'm going to have obviously a title, a statement of purpose, the problem statement, what my goals or deliverables are, objectives, that kind of thing. I'm going to have a methodology section that describes how I plan to achieve what I'm setting out to do, and I'm going to identify what resources might be needed and stakeholders, risks, et cetera. If I'm writing a research proposal, almost identical. It's almost a mirror image. I've got a statement of purpose, my rationale, background, the objectives, as opposed to deliverables, really different words for the same thing. I'm going to describe my methodology, of course. I'm going to talk about resources and impact, and I'm going to probably provide a lit review, right? So a couple subtle differences, but largely there's a similar kind of framework, right, that both adhere to.
I think the one big difference that that I think Leif called out on the slide is there's an emphasis on delivery in the project management side, right? What could go wrong? What are your barriers? How long is it going to take? How will you overcome those issues? And on the research proposal, it's more of an emphasis on evidence. How do I know this is valid? How do I know that this is going to get to the root of the problem? How
can I prove it? What literature is out there, right?
Exactly.
So it's
what supports
football,
the fact that this is the
baseball.
right thing to do, right?
Get stuff done versus go think and read about it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And so, Boise State, we looked at this when we were pulling together what we were going to use for our initiatives. We have new academic technology or instructional technology initiatives that we're going to be rolling out. How do we put together a different format for introducing these and getting kind of acceptance to move forward on it? And when we pulled templates from both of these worlds, it was so amazing to see, like section by section, how identical they were, and the instructions that you saw on how to fill them out were very, very similar. The difference is research proposals are a lot more robust. They're very verbose, right? There's a lot that goes into that. But otherwise, they're very largely the same. So we want to talk about practical application. So we kind of talked about the differences. We brought you together with some similarities. Hopefully we've got you a little bit convinced that there's common ground here that we can leverage as we move forward. And so we want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Boise State specifically. 4 key areas where we're really focusing in on it. How are we identifying strategic alignment to our campus needs? What are we doing to create rituals that hold us together? If you think about throughout time, throughout human existence, the things that hold us together are the rituals. We think about due process of the law, right? That helps us feel, it brings us together as a society. Those pieces are really important for making sure that we're structured and we're communicating and that we all feel comfortable in this world in which we need to work. Organizational strategies, how we organize our teams, how we organize our governance processes to try and best address kind of this similarities or kind of the coordination between the 2 areas. And then how are we managing a communication? What kind of tips we have around communication? So the first thing is strategic alignment. I saw a great presentation by somebody from the University of Montana in their project management office talking about a rubric that they use for scoring their projects.
Anybody here from the University of Montana? No?
So I shamelessly stole this from you if you are.
So we'll take credit for it if nobody's here. No.
Okay, yeah, this was totally our own doing. We came up with this on. So no, it was great. So what they did, they were managing just IT projects though. And we looked at this and said, well, we really need to worry more about learning technology initiatives. We need to be having that pedagogical focus on what's best for the students, what's contributing to the right kinds of interactions. And so we added sections for it. But largely, the strategic alignment is broken down into 3 sections. Our strategic alignment specifically with campus goals, presidential directives, mission statements of overall departments or colleges, and the pedagogical needs that are kind of defined by our instructional designers and leaders within the academic areas. Then the value. This tells us, what are we going to get out of it? What's the return on investment? Are we actually saving time? Are we making things better for students in some way? Are we reducing cost? Those general project management kind of things that you would need to go through. And then our probability of success. How ready is the campus to actually take on this new challenge? How how well have you thought through how you will measure the success of this project?
What's the impact on support and training?
What's the impact on support and training? Have you considered those things? And so we break down those 3 categories and we score them. We have a whole scoring system we put together for this rubric. And then based on that, each of these projects is put into one of these nice little charts over here. I don't know if you can see it. It's probably below the table for a lot of you guys. It's a bubble chart. And of course, as with all things business, the top right is the best place to be, right? So that's where we have the highest strategic alignment and the best probability of success. The size of the bubble represents the value. So we kind of have this ability to quickly eyeball it. And what we've done is made it very objective. We have both things considered. We have that business IT value in this rubric. We also have the pedagogical value and the needs of the colleges and the departments in there. And we've made it very objective, so when we go into our shared governance meetings, we can quickly eyeball these things. We can have a good discussion about some of these pieces and how these were evaluated. And we make sure that when we score it, we actually score it with both audiences. The next thing is kind of cadence. So I talk about ritual. One of the most important rituals for us to make sure that we are staying in communication is the cadence that we use or the process that we use to move these things forward. Sounds very project manager-y, doesn't it? So the idea here is that we've broken this down. We've looked at, we talked about ADDIE. We talked about the IPEC model that project management uses. We came up with our own kind of blended model, and we have it broken down into 4 general areas: envisioning, designing, implementing, reviewing. And we've tried to make the things that we're doing in there, these are just kind of for illustrative purposes, because the tasks that you're doing in these areas are not nearly as critical as the fact that you are having opportunities to pause and reflect in between each one of these.
And before we go on, I just want to mention that these steps are part of a model that we've created, and so they're included when we write a proposal for one of our initiatives. It's not just a purely project management charter, nor is it a research proposal. It's actually kind of a blend of those 2 documents that we then take to our shared governance group and get approval on it so that we can begin these phases, which we've also used as a model that blends project management and academic approaches. So this is kind of like a hybrid IPEC ADDIE sort of approach, right? Mm-hmm. That it doesn't spell a very clever acronym, unfortunately, but this is the model that we use as we do our initiatives.
The
EDIR model.
Yes, Scandinavian.
Yes.
So the thing about this one that really helped us, I mentioned pausing and reflecting. Mm-hmm. Having those opportunities or creating rituals where you're going to stop and legitimize dissent. A lot of times, especially when I was initially starting out at the university, I was working with academic areas, I would say a lot of things that made no sense to them. And depending on how busy they were or how little patience they had for what I was doing or how impacted they were by it, they would often just nod and accept and say, he sounds like he knows what he's doing. Okay, let's just go ahead and move forward. Fine. Yep. And it wasn't until we created opportunities to actually stop and legitimize dissent where people could say, I've got a question, or I'm not really sure I understand how you got to where you are, and started kind of thinking about the languages and the way we were interacting with them during those meetings where we were stopping to talk about it.
Having meetings with stakeholders is not an empty gesture, right?
No.
We want their feedback, and we want to make sure that they're comfortable with the terminology that we're using and the approaches that we're taking. So we try to make this as open and inviting as possible.
So with our teams, one of the things we'll do is when we get to this kind of end of design and we're thinking about actually moving forward and implementing this thing, we'll say, okay, so let's pretend now we've gotten all through this design stuff. Let's pretend now that it's a year. We implemented this project and it's a year later. A year later, after this thing has been implemented, what went wrong? Tell me what went wrong a year after we implemented this. And that's an opportunity for people. You've asked them to tell you, specifically, what are the bad things that I'm not considering? And as opposed to just like, what are the risks? Just give me, hypothesize, what went wrong during this process? And people feel much more comfortable sharing, especially if you've been kind of on a railroad. Some projects get fast-tracked and you know that you're going to have to do it whether you like it or not. Giving them an opportunity to legitimize that dissent and say, what's going to happen here? I'm not going to have enough support people to get this taken care of once it rolls out. Or faculty are never going to adopt this because there's no benefit in them. I can't tell what they're, this is just going to take extra time. Legitimize that dissent and have those conversations, because that will give you an opportunity to stop and put the brakes on before you get too far down the road.
Well, then everybody feels like they're on the same team too, right? If we're just being candid and open, then it's not like an us-them. We're imposing this process on you. It's more, it's a dialogue. It's a conversation.
All right, I mentioned pause and reflect. I've talked about it a few times, so I won't dwell on it here. But the other thing is making lists. Lists are very accessible. Lists are great things. We use Basecamp for tracking a lot of our stuff. It's also a very accessible tool. It has great discussion, communication components. We're just starting to kind of implement this now. But the idea behind it is, if I told you as a project manager that what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a meeting, we're going to create a risk register and a stakeholder inventory, and we're going to start going through our work breakdown structure. And after the work breakdown structure, we'll have our dependency matrix, and we'll have, we'll definitely have all of our predecessor relationships mapped out. A lot of times you come to me, I have no idea what the heck you're talking about. Hopefully you'll be able to guide me through that. But if I tell you we're going to sit down and make a list of the things that we need to do to get this done, we're going to think about how those might be impacted by other things that are going on. And at the end of it, we'll take that list and put it online so that we can kind of use it as a checklist as we move forward. That's super accessible. We can have that conversation. All right, organizational strategy.
So like I mentioned, some of the things that we've done are we have this kind of blended model that we use to take to our shared governance group. The shared governance group is called the TLTG, Technology for Learning and Teaching Group, which includes a cross-section of faculty members, staff in IT, staff from the library. We have deans. We have just a good mix of people from around campus that might have a different perspective on what we should be doing with technologies for teaching and learning, right? So we take our initiatives to them, and it's been run through our scoring rubric, and so this is an opportunity for them to provide feedback to us. The other thing that we've done is we've gone through some recent reorganizations where what used to be academic technology under our academic affairs faculty development area has split, and so Daniel and I are now part of central IT, right? And I think that was a good move because what it does is it supports the TPAC model, if anybody's heard of that. TPAC stands for Technology, Pedagogy, and Content Knowledge. It's a model that talks about promoting effectiveness of using technology for teaching and learning, right? So what it means is that you've got the technology, and that's fine, but the technology by itself doesn't make for effective use of technology for teaching and learning. You also have the people who understand pedagogy, which by itself doesn't really mean that they're using the technology well. So it's that blending of technology knowledge, which I think also relates to usability, stability, comfort level, experience, et cetera, as well as the features and functions of the technology itself, but also the pedagogical knowledge to incorporate these tools appropriately and to use them well, right? So we really embrace the TPAC model. There's another one called SAMR that it's a whole separate presentation if we were going to talk about that. But we're looking at these models to design how we are interfacing with other units organizationally. So that's how we're structuring our shared governance, our co-location of different units within our building. So we actually have instructional designers situated next to instructional technologists that are part of totally different silos. If you look at the overall org chart of our campus, we've got finance and administration over here, and we've got academic affairs that are so far removed. But we're here, since we're in the middle of the intersection of those cultures, then we're also co-located and having hallway conversations with each other all the time. And we're thinking about the intersection of technology and pedagogy as we do just our daily jobs.
All right, so the last piece here is communication, and I think that this is probably something that we inherently understand the value of doing this, and obviously a lot of these are going to be refresher, or they're going to be like, yeah, those are totally obvious, dude, thanks for that. So consider your audience, obviously consider your audience, but hopefully we've given you an idea to think about things a little bit differently as you're moving forward. So when you're in a meeting and you're thinking to yourself, man, they just don't get it. Mm-hmm. Consider the words that you're using, consider the way that you're approaching that problem, and think about whether or not the process that you're using or the language that you're using may be causing that reaction or having some impact on that reaction.
We did a little brainstorming exercise with our staff one day where we had the whiteboard out and we said, okay, if you're in a room with just faculty, what kinds of terms do you want to avoid using, right?
Yeah.
Don't say business needs and business cases.
Return
the faculty
on
are going to shut down immediately, right? You can see it in their body language, right?
Yeah. We did the same thing for IT, though. We would talk about, okay, if you're in a meeting with IT, what words do you want to avoid? What things should you not say? It was really interesting to kind of have that because all of a sudden we started thinking about, oh man, we do this all the time. I have this conversation in front of faculty and I know they're not with me now as we kind of have
You have to be a little bilingual and be able to shift, your vernacular depending on your audience sometimes.
Yeah. So collective feedback, obviously, we mentioned about those times to pause and reflect, also at the end of activities when you're done. What went well, what didn't go well, what they call it, post-mortem, which seems very morbid in general, or a lessons learned activity. Take those opportunities to gather feedback. Avoid jargon. This is an interesting one. Obviously, we all try and do this. It's one of those things as IT professionals or people who work in the realm of either supporting people who are using technology, we're pretty conscious that we should avoid using jargon. I think we become less conscious when we get into rooms with people we see as our peers. even if they are not necessarily in the same organization.
Yeah, the database spooler causes a little hiccup in the extract, and so that's why, like, oh, your roster didn't come over right. Okay, thanks, I get it now.
So we got that, I understand. So the other thing is just understanding, I think depending on the disciplines, like faculty are fantastic at jargon. They understand it for their disciplines so well, and they will throw it at you too. I spend a lot of time restating what they say in a way that I think is sort of more accessible, or like, okay, if I hear you correctly, what you were saying is, my roster didn't come over the way yeah, okay, I'm with you now. Promote dialogue. Look for those opportunities to create those conversations. So Leif mentioned our shared governance models. That's an opportunity to get kind of both worlds at the same table. Those opportunities during the project or the process or initiative where you have the great chances to pause and reflect. Those are times to get people in the same room or on the same Google Hangout or on the same Blackboard Collaborate session or whatever you can to try and get that open discussion happening. And try and phrase questions in ways that allow people to, legitimize that dissent. Let them speak freely.
Well, especially when dealing with faculty too, if you're doing your needs assessment or focus groups or things like that, what are they really trying to accomplish, right? I mean, there's this kind of literal level of what they're asking for, but what are they really trying to do? We talk about, I don't know if you've heard the Christmas ham story, but we use that as almost kind of short code for like a lot of situations that we encounter all the time.
Yeah.
It's, just briefly, it's about, passed down through the generations, this ham recipe requires that you cut off an inch at the end, and it's because grandma's pan was too short, right? So how often are we dealing with kind of legacy situations that no longer exist in some cases, but we're still cutting off that extra inch at the end because that's how we've always done it, right? So just kind of rethinking the obvious sometimes can be helpful and healthy.
All right, so in summary, I think what we're saying here is, find some common ground. Find opportunities to meet in the middle. Share some similar experiences, look for processes where there's overlap, try and relate in those ways when you can.
So ones and twos, here's our kumbaya moment.
Yes.
I want you to, again, put out your hand to the
Person next to
two,
you.
and rather than pushing against each other, shake each other's hands, right?
Doesn't that feel good?
This is an example of a ritual. This is a common framework that we all understand. It's a signal of trust and respect and equality.
Yep, look for those opportunities to shake hands. And then remember who you're playing for. At the end of the day, we are all in this to make students successful, right? So that's, if you're ever having trouble relating, you always come back to that.
It's not IT versus faculty or administration versus whoever, right? We're all on the same team. We're all trying to serve students and improve their experience at the end of the day, right?
And in a hard meeting where you're totally stuck and everyone's got their arms crossed, if you can figure out how to bring it back to this, sometimes you can get them to open up a little bit again and keep moving forward. All right, questions? I have a box I want to throw at you. So. All right, here it comes. Watch the chandelier.
Nice throw.
I lost part of it. Oh no, Johnny's dead. My question has to do with your experience with what I view as the iterative nature of doing this kind of work. At least one of you has a PM certification, and that it wasn't something that you just took a 2-hour course for and you were done, right? So that took a lot of work, and then you have to have a lot of experience to make it really stick, as I understand that field. So it seems to me that, like, for this to work, it's one thing for it to, like, you've got a room full of strangers, so to speak, and you're going to say, well, let's list some stuff out, talk about what we need to get done, the sort of thing that you summarized, versus a team that you're working with all the time, and to think about project management, subtracting that word, and making it kind of a growth process of, like, getting to a consistently good workflow. I'm just sort of wondering what your experience has been like with working with teams to learn how to behave this way.
Yeah, and I think you spend a lot of time, some of it is, teams go through those normal phases anyway, storming, forming, norming, performing. Have you heard that before? Right, there's an evolution to a team you're working with. So as a project manager, one of the wonderful things is you have a significant amount of accountability and absolutely no authority, because none of these people actually work for you, right? So I can't threaten you. I can't, promise you any reward. I have to find a way to work with you and try and keep you motivated to move through those things. So working through those phases initially where the teams are storming, right? They come in and everybody has a different perspective, a different view. They're here for a different reason. Their boss told them to be. They're significantly invested in it, whatever the case may be, to sort of, coming together and actually norming and be able to do the work together and then performing in the end. it's a journey. And what I try and do is find things that are really accessible and easy to do at each kind of stage along the way. One of the first things I like to ask is, it comes from an agile kind of project management, where we just ask, what does done look like? You know, for each of your areas and the people that you represent at this project team meeting, what does done look like for this project? You know, how will we know when we are finished? And a lot of times that'll get to, well, you know, from a support perspective, that means that I know what we need to do and it doesn't increase my call volumes, and you know, that I have all the access to the answers I need to give. From an academic side, it doesn't add any additional time for me. So you get to kind of the root of each of the areas' interests. And that can be really, really successful in helping create those teams and bring them together. And it also makes it people aware of what everyone is bringing to the table. What are their motivations? What are the things that are going to help them move forward? Understanding those will make you much more successful. Did that help? Okay.
And so I'm like the John Hodgman character in the Mac and PC. Actually, I come from an instructional design background. Daniel comes from a project management background. But when you talk about iterative or continual improvement, I mean, that's something that really made a lot of sense to me. When I first started working with project managers and they kept saying, a project needs to have a finish point, I came from the school of thought of like quality matters, you know, a course is never perfect, you need to continually revise and improve it. So some of these agile methodologies really resonate with my understanding of, you know, continual quality improvement in instructional design.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, you guys are taking it easy on us.
Hey, thanks for coming,
Yeah.
everybody. I don't know if we're ahead of schedule here a little bit, so you might have a few extra minutes. But
I have no idea. What time are we supposed to be done? 10 minutes ago? Oh, from now.
all right.
Okay.
Well, we'll just hang
Leif
out.
also can sing. He does a little
boy.
musical performance. All right, no, that's about it, guys. So thanks so much. Really do appreciate your time.
Thanks.